My name is Viola, and at 32 years old, I have learned that silence is often the most expensive weapon you can use against your enemies. I pulled my matte black Ford F-150 up to the gilded iron gates of Sterling Manor. The truck was a 1998 model on the outside, rusted at the wheel wells, and sporting a dent in the rear bumper from years of hard labor. It was the last thing my father left me before he passed, and I kept it as a reminder of where I came from. What the people at this wedding did not know was that under the hood lay a custom engine worth $80,000, and the woman driving it ran a logistics empire that moved freight across the entire Midwest. The valet boy looked at my truck like I had just dumped a load of manure on his shoes. He was young, maybe 19, with a sneer that matched the pretentiousness of the estate. He stepped in front of my hood, holding up a gloved hand. "Delivery entrance is around back," he said without even looking me in the eye. I rolled down the window, letting the summer heat of Chicago invade the air-conditioned cab. "I am not a delivery driver," I said calmly, keeping my voice low and steady. "I am the sister of the bride." The valet laughed, a short, sharp sound that grated on my nerves. "Yeah, right. And I am the Prince of Wales. Look, lady, we have a strict policy. No commercial vehicles, and certainly no junkers in the front drive. Mr. Sterling does not want his guests' eyes offended. You need to park in the overflow lot. That is about a mile back down the road near the highway exit. Then you can walk up." I looked past him at the driveway. It was lined with rented Lamborghinis and leased Mercedes-Benzes. It was a parade of debt on wheels. I could have argued. I could have told him that I could buy this entire estate and turn it into a parking lot for my fleet. But I didn't. I simply nodded, shifting the truck into reverse. "That is fine," I said. "I could use the exercise." I parked the truck in a muddy patch of grass a mile away, just as instructed. As I walked back toward the manor, the sky opened up. It wasn't a storm, just a steady gray drizzle that turned the dirt path into a slick mess. I was wearing a tailored navy suit. It cost $3,000 and was cut to fit me perfectly, but it was wool and it was heavy. By the time I reached the main entrance, my heels were caked in brown mud, and my hair was damp against my neck. I saw my reflection in the glass doors of the manor. I looked rough. I looked tired. But I also looked dangerous. The guests were arriving in droves, stepping out of dry cars under large umbrellas held by staff. I walked up the stairs alone. A cousin of the groom, a woman named Tiffany, who I had met once at the engagement party, looked me up and down. She nudged her husband and whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Oh my God, look at her. She looks like she walked here from the swamp. I guess the rumors are true. Chloe really does have to support her." I kept walking. My head was high, my spine was steel. I reached the check-in table where a woman with a clipboard was managing the guest list. She scanned the names, her finger tracing the expensive paper. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Viola," I said. "Viola Davis, sister of the bride." She paused. Her finger stopped near the top of the list where the family members were usually seated. Then she frowned. She flipped to the second page, then the third. Finally, she found it on the very last page, the one reserved for last-minute additions and vendors. "Oh yes, here you are. You are not on the VIP list, so you will need to use the side entrance near the kitchen. The main ballroom doors are reserved for the wedding party and distinguished guests." I looked at the double doors just 10 feet away. I could see Chloe inside, standing under a chandelier that probably cost more than this woman made in a year. Chloe looked beautiful, and she looked terrified. She caught my eye for a split second. I waited for her to wave. I waited for her to run over and tell them to let her sister in. Instead, she turned her back and pretended to adjust the train of her dress. "Understood," I said to the woman with the clipboard. "The side entrance it is." I navigated through a narrow hallway that smelled of dish soap and frantic cooking. Waiters in black vests were rushing back and forth carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. I was practically invisible to them, just another body in the service corridor. When I finally emerged into the ballroom, I was at the very back behind a large decorative pillar. I scanned the room for my seat. Table 1 was right next to the dance floor draped in gold silk. That was where Preston Sterling, the father of the groom, sat, looking like a king on a throne. Table 2 was for the bride's family. My cousins and aunts who had barely spoken to me in years were there laughing and drinking champagne. I looked for my name card. It wasn't there. I finally found it. Table 44. It was tucked in the corner right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter kicked the door open, a blast of hot air and noise hit the table. There were no flowers on table 44, no gold silk, just a plain white cloth that had a small stain on the edge. I pulled out my chair. The other seats were occupied by a woman in a gray uniform and a man in a chauffeur's cap. The woman was the nanny for one of the guests' children. The man was driving the Rolls-Royce rented for the newlyweds. "So you are the sister, huh?" the driver asked as he buttered a roll. He was a heavily built man with tired eyes. "Name is Marcus. I am Viola," I said, unfolding my napkin. Marcus shook his head. "That is cold. Sitting back here with the help. I mean, no offense to us, but you are family." I looked across the room. Chloe was laughing at something Julian, her new husband, whispered in her ear. She looked radiant. She also looked like a lie. Every inch of that wedding, from the dress to the flowers to the deposit on the venue, had been paid for by me. I had wired the money to Chloe's account every time she called crying about how Preston was putting pressure on them to have a royal wedding, but wouldn't release the funds. "It is fine, Marcus," I said, pouring myself a glass of water because there was no wine on our table. "I prefer the company back here anyway. It is more honest." "Honest," Marcus snorted. "Ain't nothing honest about this place. You know Preston Sterling has not paid his staff in 3 months, right? My company is threatening to pull the contract. If he does not pay the bill by midnight tonight, I am driving that Rolls-Royce back to the garage with or without the bride and groom inside." I paused my glass halfway to my lips. "Is that so?" I asked. "Yeah," Marcus whispered, leaning in. "And the nanny here, her boss was talking earlier, said Preston is leveraging this wedding to trap an investor. He is broke, lady. Flat broke. He needs people to think he is rich so he can sign some big deal next week. That is why everything is so flashy. It is a smokescreen." I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. I knew Preston was in trouble. That was why I had my lawyers look into his finances weeks ago, but I did not know it was this desperate. This was good intel. Dinner was served. At the main tables, waiters were placing down plates of steaming lobster tail and filet mignon. At table 44, a waiter dropped a cardboard box in front of me. It was a cold turkey sandwich and a bag of chips, the staff meal. I stared at the sandwich. The disrespect was precise. It was calculated. Preston wanted me to know exactly where I stood in his hierarchy. I was the dirt beneath his shoes. I did not eat. I just watched. I watched Preston drinking glass after glass of scotch. I watched him slapping backs and shaking hands, playing the role of the benevolent billionaire. And then the music stopped. The best man handed Preston the microphone. He stood up, swaying slightly. His face was flushed red. The room went silent. "Welcome, everyone," Preston boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "What a night. What a glorious night. We are here to celebrate the union of my son Julian and the beautiful Chloe." Applause rippled through the room. Chloe smiled nervously. "You know," Preston continued, walking, pacing the stage. "Raising a child is expensive. Raising a son like Julian takes resources. But we Sterlings provided. We built a legacy, and we are so happy to welcome Chloe into that legacy. She is a wonderful girl, hard-working, unlike some people." The air in the room shifted. It became heavy. Preston turned. His eyes scanned the back of the room until they locked onto me in the shadows of table 44. "Yes, I am talking about you, Viola," he said, pointing a finger. The spotlight operator, confused, swung the light toward the kitchen doors, illuminating me sitting next to the kitchen trash can. There she is. Preston laughed. The sister. You know, folks, it is tragic, really. Chloe here has been working double shifts at the art gallery just to make sure her big sister has food on the table. While we are all here celebrating success, Viola shows up in a truck that looks like it belongs in a junkyard. The room erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, jagged sound. She sits there eating my food, drinking my water, and she has never contributed a dime to this family, Preston sneered. A freeloader, a parasite. That is what you are, Viola. You are lucky Chloe has a heart of gold because if it were up to me, you would be eating that sandwich in the parking lot. I looked at Chloe. This was her moment. This was the moment she could stand up and say no. She could say, my sister paid for this dress. My sister paid for this venue. My sister is the reason I am not starving. But Chloe did nothing. She looked down at her lap, playing with her diamond ring. Julian the groom grabbed the microphone from his father. He was laughing too. Do not worry, Dad, he said. Once we move into the new penthouse, I will make sure the security is tight. We cannot have raccoons digging through our trash, right? The laughter grew louder. My own cousins were laughing. The people I sent Christmas cards to were laughing. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Marcus, the driver. He looked angry. You want me to get you out of here, miss? He asked quietly. I can bring the car around. I looked at Marcus and shook my head. No, Marcus. I am not leaving. Not yet. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I had one draft message saved. It was addressed to my personal attorney, a shark named Arthur, who had been waiting for my signal since 9 a.m. The text was simple. 3 words. Execute. No mercy. I hit send. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. The laughter died down slightly as people turned to watch me. They expected me to cry. They expected me to run out the side door in shame. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I picked up my clutch, and I walked. But I did not walk toward the exit. I walked straight toward the stage. I walked past table 44, past the kitchen doors, and right through the center of the room. Preston watched me, his smile faltering slightly. What are you doing? He asked into the microphone. Getting more food. We are not a soup kitchen, Viola. I ignored him. I ignored Julian, who stepped forward to block my path. I ignored Chloe, who finally looked up, her eyes wide with panic. I walked straight to the ladies' room adjacent to the stage. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, letting it slam shut behind me. Outside, the murmur of confusion began to rise. They thought I was hiding. They thought I was broken. I stood in front of the large mirror in the restroom. The sound of the party was muffled now. I looked at my reflection. The mud was still on my shoes. My hair was still damp. But my eyes were clear. My phone buzzed. It was a reply from Arthur. It is done. The deed is recorded. You are the owner of record. The eviction notice has been filed electronically. Police are on standby. I took a deep breath. I reached into my bag and pulled out a tube of red lipstick. I applied it carefully, tracing the curve of my lips. It was a shade called Victory. Preston Sterling thought he was humiliating a poor truck driver. He did not realize he had just declared war on his new landlord. I put the lipstick away. I checked my watch. The transfer of ownership would take exactly 10 minutes to register in the county database. 10 minutes. That was all the time they had left. I opened the bathroom door and stepped back out into the lion's den. But this time I wasn't the prey. I was the hunter. The heavy oak door of the ladies' lounge clicked shut behind me, cutting off the roar of laughter from the ballroom. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The restroom was more like a private suite lined with Italian marble and gilded mirrors that stretched from floor to ceiling. I walked over to the vanity and gripped the cold porcelain edge of the sink. My knuckles turned white. I could still hear Preston Sterling's voice echoing in my head, calling me a parasite. I could still see the smirk on Julian's face. But the image that burned the most was Chloe, my little sister, the girl I had raised since she was 10 years old. She had looked down at her lap and said nothing. I turned on the faucet, letting the freezing water run over my wrists. I needed to cool the fire that was raging in my veins. I looked at myself in the mirror. My tailored navy suit was impeccable, but there was a smudge of mud on my cheek from the long walk from the parking lot. I wiped it away with a paper towel. I looked tired. Not physically tired, but soul tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a burden that refuses to walk on its own. Suddenly, the main door swung open. A wave of high-pitched giggling filled the room. I instinctively stepped back into the handicap stall and locked the door. I did not want to speak to anyone. I just wanted 5 minutes of peace before I executed the plan that would end this charade. Through the crack in the stall door, I saw 3 of Chloe's bridesmaids spill into the room. They were wearing matching lavender gowns that I knew cost $600 each. I knew the price because I had seen the charge on my American Express statement last month. "Oh my God, did you see her shoes?" one of them asked, her voice shrill with amusement. She sounded like Tiffany, the maid of honor. She walked in here with mud all over her heels. Who wears sensible pumps to a black tie wedding at Sterling Manor? "Well, what do you expect?" replied another voice, as they began touching up their makeup in the mirror. "Chloe told us her sister is basically a glorified trucker. She probably has to save up for months just to buy a tank of gas for that monstrosity she drives. It is embarrassing, really. I do not know why Chloe even invited her." I leaned my head against the cool metal of the stall wall. They had no idea. They saw a woman in a truck and saw poverty. They did not see the logistics empire I had built from the ground up. They did not see that my company V-Line Logistics moved 40% of the freight in the Midwest. They did not know that the very lipstick they were applying was probably shipped on one of my trucks. But the next words froze the blood in my veins. "You know what is the funniest part?" Tiffany said, laughing as she sprayed perfume into the air. "That dress Chloe is wearing, the custom Vera Wang, $15,000. And the honeymoon to the Maldives next week, $30,000 for first-class tickets and the overwater villa." "Yeah, so?" asked the third girl. "So Chloe did not pay for any of it," Tiffany whispered. But it was a loud stage whisper. "And neither did Preston. I heard Chloe telling Julian that she put it all on her sister's secondary credit card. She calls it the magic wallet. She said her sister is so desperate for family connection that she never checks the statements. She just pays the bill like a good little ATM machine." The girls erupted in cruel laughter. "That is genius," the third girl said. "So the sister is paying for the very wedding where she is getting roasted. That is pathetic. If I were her, I would have cut Chloe off years ago, but I guess some people are just born to be doormats." I stood there in the dark stall and I felt something snap inside my chest. It was a physical sensation, like a rubber band breaking after being stretched for too long. For 12 years I had told myself that I was helping Chloe. I told myself that I was honoring our parents' memory. I closed my eyes and a memory washed over me. I was 20 years old, standing in a sterile hospital room. My mother was fading fast, hooked up to machines that beeped in a rhythmic countdown. She had squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a dying woman. "Viola," she had whispered, "promise me. Promise me you will take care of Chloe. She is the little one. She is not strong like you. Protect her." I had promised. I had sacrificed my acceptance to Harvard. I had sold our childhood home to pay off debts. I had climbed into the cab of a semi-truck and driven millions of miles to put food on the table. I had protected her. But listening to those girls laugh, I realized the truth. I had not protected her. I had enabled her. I had created a monster who viewed my love as a weakness and my bank account as a birthright. The bridesmaids finished their grooming and fluttered out of the room, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume and toxic gossip in their wake. I unlocked the stall door and stepped out. The room was silent again. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against a small velvet box. I pulled it out. Inside was a vintage diamond ring. It had belonged to our grandmother. It was not the biggest diamond in the world, but it was flawless. It was the one thing I had saved from the estate sale after Mom died. I had kept it in a safety deposit box for a decade, waiting for the day Chloe got married. I had planned to give it to her tonight during the speeches. I had planned to tell her that Mom and Dad would have been proud. I opened the box. The diamond caught the light of the chandelier, sparkling with a purity that felt out of place in this house of lies. I looked at the ring. Then I looked at the mirror. She calls it the magic wallet. I snapped the box shut. The sound was sharp like a gunshot. "No more," I whispered to the empty room. I shoved the ring back deep into my pocket. Chloe would not get the ring. She would not get the honeymoon. She would not get the satisfaction of seeing me break. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. I was ready. I was going to walk out there and burn it all down. I reached for the door handle, but before I could turn it, the door flew open again. This time it was not the bridesmaids. It was Beatrice Sterling, the mother of the groom. She was a tall woman with hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection and a face that had seen the best plastic surgeons in Chicago. She was wearing a silver gown that probably cost more than my first truck. She stopped when she saw me blocking the doorway. Her eyes narrowed. She did not look at my face. She looked at my ears. "Viola," she said. Her voice was cold and demanding, lacking any pleasantries. "I was looking for you." I stared at her. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Can I help you?" She stepped closer, invading my personal space. She smelled of gin and entitlement. "Actually, yes, you can," she said. "The photographer is about to take the formal family portraits in the library. We want everything to look cohesive, high-end." She reached out a manicured hand and pointed at my ears. "Those earrings," she said. "The pearl drops. They are genuine, aren't they?" I touched my earlobe. These were my mother's earrings. They were simple, elegant pearls that my father had bought her for their 20th anniversary. They were the only jewelry I wore every single day. "Yes," I said. "They are." "Good," Beatrice said, holding out her hand, palm up. "Give them to me." I blinked. "Excuse me," I asked, thinking I had misheard. "Chloe is wearing costume jewelry." Beatrice sighed, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "It looks cheap under the strobe lights. Those pearls will match her dress perfectly. Take them off and let her borrow them for the photos. You are not in the main portraits anyway, so you do not need them." I stared at her open hand. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost impressive in its absolute lack of shame. She wanted to strip the jewelry off my body to decorate the sister who had just humiliated me because I wasn't important enough to be in the picture. "I need them now," Viola Beatrice snapped, snapping her fingers. "The photographer charges by the hour. Do not be selfish. You can have them back after the reception, assuming you do not leave early." I felt a cold smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a wolf watching a rabbit walk into a trap. "You want my earrings?" I asked slowly. "Yes," Beatrice hissed. "God, you are slow. Give them to me." I reached up and unclasped the pearls one by one. I felt the weight of them in my palm. They were warm from my skin. I looked Beatrice Sterling in the eye. "You want to improve the quality of the photo?" I asked. Beatrice nodded impatiently. "Exactly. We need to maintain the Sterling standard." I dropped the pearls into her outstretched hand. She closed her fist around them instantly, like a greedy child. She did not say thank you. She turned on her heel, preparing to rush back to her perfect family portrait. "Beatrice!" I called out just as she reached the door. She stopped and looked back over her shoulder, annoyed. "What now?" "Hold on to those tight," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "They are worth more than this entire house." Beatrice rolled her eyes and pushed through the door, disappearing into the hallway. I stood alone in the silence. My ears felt naked. My heart felt cold. But my mind was clear. They had taken my money. They had taken my dignity. Now they had taken my mother's earrings. They had taken everything. Which meant I had nothing left to lose. and a person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the world. I checked my watch. The 10 minutes were up. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the confirmation from the county clerk. The transfer was complete. I walked to the door. I did not smooth my suit. I did not check my makeup. I simply opened the door and stepped out into the corridor. It was time to introduce the Sterlings to their new landlord. Beatrice Sterling stood before me with her palm open waiting. Her fingers were manicured to perfection, the nails painted a shade of icy pink that matched the coldness in her eyes. She did not look like a mother asking a favor. She looked like a landlord coming to collect rent from a tenant she despised. The fluorescent lights of the bathroom hummed above us, magnifying the tension in the small tiled room. "Give them to me, Viola," she said again, her voice flat and impatient. "I do not have all day. The photographer is waiting and the lighting in the garden is fading. We need to get the family portraits done before the sun goes down." I instinctively reached up and touched the cool, smooth surface of the pearl in my left ear. These were not just earrings. They were the South Sea pearls my father had bought for my mother on their 25th anniversary. He had saved for 3 years to buy them, working double shifts at the shipping yard. My mother had worn them to every church service, every graduation, and every holiday until the day she died. When the nurses handed me her personal effects in a plastic bag at the hospital, these earrings were the only things inside. They were the only physical piece of her I had left. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my stomach. "These are not costume jewelry. These belong to my mother. I do not take them off, ever." Beatrice let out a sharp sigh, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling as if I were a petulant child refusing to share a toy. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Viola, grow up," she snapped, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "Chloe is wearing rental jewelry. It looks cheap. It sparkles too much under the flash. We need something understated, something elegant, something that says old money, not strip mall rental." She pointed a long finger at my ear. "Those pearls are perfect, and let us be honest, dear. You are not going to be in the main family photos. We are keeping the circle tight. Just the parents and the couple. You do not need them. Chloe is the bride. It is her day. Stop being so selfish and hand them over." Selfish. The word hung in the air like a slap. I looked at this woman wrapped in a silver gown that cost more than my first truck. She knew nothing about sacrifice. She knew nothing about what it took to keep a family afloat when the water was rising over your head. "I am not giving you my mother's earrings," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Ask the stylist to find something else." Beatrice's face hardened. The mask of polite society slipped off completely, revealing the predator underneath. She leaned in until I could smell the gin on her breath. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little nobody," she hissed. "You are here on sufferance. You are eating my food, drinking my wine, and breathing my air. If you cause a scene, if you make my daughter upset on her big day, I will have security escort you out the back gate so fast your head will spin. Do you want that? Do you want to be thrown out of your own sister's wedding in front of everyone?" I stared at her. I looked at the greed in her eyes. She did not just want the earrings for the photo. She wanted to strip me of the one thing that gave me dignity. She wanted to prove that even the jewelry on my body belonged to the Sterling family if they decided they wanted it. I realized then that arguing was pointless. Men like Preston and women like Beatrice did not understand the word no. They only understood leverage, and right now they thought they held all the cards. They were wrong. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up. My fingers brushed against the metal clasp. I unlatched the left earring, then the right. I held them in my hand for a moment, feeling their weight. They felt warm from my skin. Beatrice smiled a triumphant smirk that made my stomach turn. "Finally," she said, reaching out to snatch them. I pulled my hand back just an inch, making her grasp at empty air. Her eyes snapped up to mine, surprised. I stepped forward, forcing her to take a step back. I placed the pearls into her open palm, but I did not let go immediately. I held her gaze, my eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her blink. Keep them safe, Beatrice. I whispered, my voice soft and dangerous. These are not just pearls. They cost more than your life. Beatrice pulled her hand away, clutching the earrings tight. She let out a nervous laugh, trying to regain her composure. Do not be dramatic, Viola, she scoffed, turning toward the door. I will have the planner return them to you after the cake cutting, assuming you are still here. She pushed through the bathroom door and disappeared, leaving me alone in the silence. I stood there staring at the closed door. My ears felt naked. My heart felt hollow. I walked over to the sink and gripped the porcelain edge. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was 32 years old, wearing a $3,000 suit and commanding an empire. But in that moment, the reflection blurred and shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't in the marble bathroom of Sterling Manor. I was back in the rain. The flashback hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was 10 years ago. I was 22. I was standing in the mud at the Holy Cross Cemetery, staring at two fresh graves. The dirt was still loose and dark against the green grass. My parents were gone. A car accident on an icy highway had taken them both in an instant, leaving me and Chloe alone in a world that did not care about orphans. I was holding a black umbrella, trying to shield Chloe from the downpour. She was 14, wearing a dress that was too small for her, shivering against my side. Viola, she had sobbed, burying her face in my coat. What are we going to do? The bank called again. They said we have to leave the house by Friday. I tightened my grip on her shoulder. I did not have an answer. In my pocket was a crumpled letter I had received just 2 days before the accident. It was on thick cream-colored paper. The header read, Harvard University. It was my acceptance letter. It was my ticket out. It was the dream I had worked for, studied for, and prayed for every single night since I was 12. A full scholarship to the business program. But then, I looked at the house keys in my other hand. The mortgage was underwater. The life insurance policy had lapsed a month before the crash because Dad had been laid off and couldn't pay the premium. We had nothing. Zero. If I went to Harvard, Chloe would go into the foster care system. The state would take her. We would be separated. I looked at the grave. I looked at the acceptance letter. The rain smeared the ink on the page, turning the crimson Harvard crest into a bloody blur. I let go of Chloe for just a second. I took the letter out of my pocket. I did not hesitate. I crumpled it into a ball and dropped it into the mud right on top of the casket. I watched the paper dissolve in the rain. Come on, Chloe, I said, my voice sounding older than my years. We are going. Where are we going? She asked, wiping her eyes. To work, I said. That afternoon, I walked into the local dispatch office of a long-haul trucking company. The air smelled of stale coffee and diesel fumes. The dispatcher, a gruff man with grease under his fingernails, looked at me like I was lost. I need a job, I said, slamming my driver's license on the counter. I have a commercial license. My dad taught me to drive a rig before I could drive a car. I will take the routes nobody wants. I will drive nights. I will drive holidays. Just give me the keys. He gave me the keys to a rusted, beat-up freighter that smelled like wet dog and cigarettes. For the next 10 years, that truck became my home. I remembered the nights spent sleeping in rest stops off Interstate 80, clutching a tire iron because someone was banging on the cab door. I remembered eating cold beans from a can on Christmas Eve parked in a lot in Nebraska, while Chloe posted photos of the new laptop I had bought her. I remembered the phone calls. Viola, I need money for the prom dress. Viola, I need money for the sorority dues. Viola, I need money for the spring break trip to Cancun. I never said no. I drove more miles. I took more loads. I built my company one truck at a time, expanding from a single driver to a fleet owner. I lived on coffee and adrenaline so Chloe could live on champagne and dreams. I did it because I promised my mother I would take care of her. I did it because I wanted Chloe to have the life I threw into the mud that day at the cemetery. And now here we were. Chloe was outside laughing with people who thought I was trash. She was wearing my mother's pearls on her ears, letting her mother-in-law treat me like a servant. The memory faded. The bright lights of the bathroom came back into focus. I touched my ear again. I had given them everything: my education, my youth, my dignity, and now my mother's legacy. But the ledger was full, the debt was due. Beatrice Sterling thought she had just taken a pair of earrings. She did not know she had just pulled the pin on a grenade. I straightened my jacket. I wiped the single tear that had escaped from the corner of my eye. It would be the last tear I ever shed for this family. I turned from the mirror. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was done being the sister who sacrificed. It was time to be the CEO who executed. I pushed open the door and walked back into the party. The hallway outside the restroom was empty and quiet, a stark contrast to the noise of the party and the chaos inside my own head. I leaned against the wall and pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over the banking app. I opened it. I did not look at the current balance, which sat at a healthy 8 figures. Instead, I went to the transaction history. I filtered the search by recipient. Chloe. The list populated instantly. It was not just a page. It was a scroll that seemed to have no end. It was a digital waterfall of my blood, sweat, and tears converted into currency. I started scrolling down, going back in time. 2 weeks ago. $15,000. Labeled wedding dress final payment. 1 month ago. $4,000. Labeled catering deposit. 3 months ago. $2,000. Labeled rent help. I kept scrolling, and as the dates rolled back, the hallway of Sterling Manor faded away. The smell of expensive perfume and roasted lamb was replaced by the scent of stale coffee diesel fumes and the metallic tang of old adrenaline. I was back in the cab of my first truck. It was a Peterbilt 379, a beast of a machine that shook my bones every time I shifted gears. I was 23 years old. My friends from high school were posting pictures of graduation parties and internships. I was parked in a truck stop in Wyoming, watching snow pile up on the windshield, praying the heater would not quit again. I remembered that night vividly. My phone had rung at 2 in the morning. It was Chloe. She was a freshman in college. Viola. She had cried, her voice slurring slightly. I messed up. I went out with some girls and I lost my purse. My ID is gone. My cash is gone. And rent is due tomorrow. The landlord said he will kick me out. I was eating a dinner of dry wheat bread and peanut butter because I was saving every penny to pay off the loan on the truck. My back was screaming from driving 14 hours straight. My eyes burned from fatigue. How much do you need, Chloe? I had asked. 800, she sniffled. Please, Viola. I am scared. I did not ask why she was out at a club on a Tuesday. I did not ask why she wasn't more careful. I transferred the money. $800. That was 4 days of driving for me. 4 days of staring at the white lines on the highway until they blurred into hallucinations. I took another bite of my dry sandwich and started the engine. I drove through the snowstorm that night because I needed to make up the deficit. I scrolled further down on my phone. 5 years ago. $6,000. Labeled Study Abroad Paris. I remembered that one too. I had driven down to visit her at the university before she left. I was so proud. My little sister, the artist, going to Europe. I had parked my rig at a rest area 5 miles away and took a taxi to her dorm because I knew the truck was too big for the campus streets. I was wearing my work boots and a flannel shirt. I had scrubbed my hands raw in the gas station sink, but I could still see the faint lines of grease under my fingernails. I found her on the quad sitting with a group of students who looked like they stepped out of a catalog. They were laughing, drinking lattes, discussing postmodernism. When Chloe saw me, her smile dropped. She stood up quickly, blocking me from her friend's view. She marched over to me, her face flushed not with joy, but with embarrassment. "Viola," she hissed, keeping her voice low. "What are you doing here?" "I came to say goodbye," I said, holding out a bag. "I bought you a new coat. For Paris. It gets cold there." She took the bag without looking inside. "Thanks," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Look, I am really busy right now. We have a seminar. Can I meet your friends? I asked, stepping to the side. No, she snapped, stepping in front of me again. They are They are from very different backgrounds, Viola. Their parents are diplomats and doctors. It is just... It would be awkward. Just go? Okay. I will call you when I land. She turned and ran back to her circle. I watched her laugh and point toward the parking lot, making a joke. Her friends laughed. I walked back to the taxi alone. I went back to my truck. I slept in the cab that night because I couldn't afford a hotel after paying for her plane ticket and her coat. I looked down at the phone in my hand. The scrolling continued. Medical bills, dental work, laptop replacements, art supplies, car insurance. 12 years. I had been her father, her mother, her bank, her safety net. And in exchange, she had given me nothing but shame. To her, I was just the resource she mined to fuel her fantasy life. She told the world she was a self-made artist. She told the Sterlings she was an investor. She had built a castle on a foundation of my broken back and sleepless nights. I stopped scrolling. I reached the bottom of the list. The very first transfer, 10 years ago, $200, labeled groceries. That was the day after the funeral. It was the last of the cash Dad had in his wallet. I had given it to her so she could buy comfort food while I went to find a job. I closed the app. The screen turned black, reflecting my face. I did not look sad anymore. The nostalgia had burned away, leaving only cold clarity. I was not a sister to them. I was a utility. Like electricity or water. You do not thank the electricity for keeping the lights on. You only notice it when it cuts out. Well, the power was about to go out. I put the phone in my pocket. I pushed myself off the wall. I had one last thing to do. I needed to look her in the eye. Not as the sister who drove a truck, not as the ATM machine, but as the woman who held the deed to the roof over her head. I wanted to give her one chance. Just one. If she could look at me and acknowledge the truth. If she could say thank you just once. Maybe I would pause the eviction. Maybe I would just ruin Preston and spare her. I walked down the long corridor toward the bridal suite. The carpet was plush under my feet. The walls were lined with sconces that cast a warm, golden light. It was a house built for secrets. I reached the end of the hall. The door to the bridal suite was heavy mahogany with a brass handle. I raised my hand to knock, but then I heard a voice. It was loud, angry, and it was coming from inside the room. I paused, my hand hovering inches from the wood. You told me she was stupid, Chloe. It was Preston Sterling. His voice was not the booming baritone he used for speeches. It was a nasty, snarling sound. I leaned closer to the door. I did not say she was stupid. Preston, Chloe's voice replied, shaking and tearful. I said she was simple. There is a difference. She trusts me. She has always done whatever I asked. She is sitting out there like a stain on my tablecloth, Preston spat. And that truck? My God. Do you know what the mayor said to me when he arrived? He asked if we were doing construction. It is humiliating. I know, Chloe sobbed. I told her to park in the back. I tried to hide her. Well, you didn't try hard enough, Preston yelled. And what about the money? You said she signed the loan guarantee for the business expansion. Where is the paperwork? I need that $10 million line of credit by Monday, or we are dead in the water. I froze. Loan guarantee. I had never signed a loan guarantee. Chloe had brought me some papers a week ago saying they were for insurance on her car. I had glanced at them, but I hadn't signed anything yet because I wanted my lawyer Arthur to review them first. She was going to trick me. She was going to forge my signature or trick me into signing away the company I built to save her father-in-law's failing business. I am working on it, Chloe pleaded. She is stubborn, but I will get her to do it. I just need time. Once the wedding is over, I will tell her I am pregnant or something. She is obsessed with family. She will sign anything if she thinks it is for a baby. I felt the blood drain from my face. She wasn't just ungrateful, she was predatory. She knew exactly what buttons to push. She knew my weakness was my love for family, and she was planning to weaponize a non-existent child to rob me. That was it. The final thread holding me to her snapped. There was no saving this. There was no redemption. There was only the nuclear option. I lowered my hand. I did not knock. I stepped back from the door. Inside the room, they were plotting my destruction. They were discussing how to bleed the golden goose dry before throwing the carcass in the trash. They had no idea the wolf was already at the door. I turned around and walked back toward the ballroom. My steps were silent on the carpet, but inside I was screaming. I checked my watch. The 10 minutes were up. The transfer was complete. The lights were about to go out. I was done being the victim. It was time to show them exactly what a simple truck driver could do. I stood frozen outside the heavy mahogany door of the bridal suite. My hand, which had been raised to knock, dropped slowly to my side. The wood of the door was thick, but it could not block the venomous volume of Preston Sterling's voice. "Is this it?" Preston roared. I heard the sound of paper being ripped or thrown. "Is this the hall? Is this what your wealthy friends brought to the table?" There was a pause, and then the sound of Chloe sobbing. A pathetic whimpering sound that I had spent my entire life trying to silence with hugs and ice cream and money. "Dad, please," Chloe stammered. "It is over $50,000 in checks. That is a lot of money. People were generous." 50,000? Preston scoffed, and I could imagine the spit flying from his mouth. 50,000 does not even cover the champagne bill, Chloe. I spent 80,000 on flowers. I spent 20,000 on that ridiculous ice sculpture. I did it because you said this wedding would bring in the heavy hitters. You said your friends from the art world and Julian's connections would bring real capital. "They are just gifts, Dad," Chloe cried. "It is a wedding, not a fundraiser. It is a fundraiser for me," Preston shouted, and then his voice dropped to a terrifying hiss that was even easier to hear through the crack in the door. "Listen to me, you stupid girl. You think I threw this party because I love seeing you in a white dress. I did it because I am drowning." I leaned closer, my ear almost touching the doorframe. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my body was perfectly still. "What do you mean, drowning?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "I mean the banks are circling," Preston growled. "The construction business is leveraged to the hilt. This house, Sterling Manor, it is mortgaged 3 times over. I haven't paid the interest on the loans in 6 months. I needed this wedding to show the investors that the Sterling name is still solid. I needed a cash injection. And $50,000 is an insult. It won't even keep the lights on for another week." I closed my eyes. The rumors Marcus the driver had told me were true. The empire was a hologram, a shiny facade with nothing behind it but rot and debt. "So what do we do?" Chloe asked, sniffing. "We go to the well," Preston said. "We go to the only person in this building who actually has liquid cash." "Your sister?" Viola Chloe asked, "but I already put the wedding on her card." "She is going to be mad when she sees the bill. She won't be mad if she thinks she is helping you secure your future," Preston said. His voice became smooth, manipulative, the voice of a con man. "You said she runs a logistics company. You said she has perfect credit." "She does," Chloe said. "She owns the fleet outright." "No debt," Perfect Preston said. "Here is what you are going to do. I have the papers right here in my jacket. It is a loan guarantee. It puts up her company assets as collateral for my construction loans. If she signs this, the bank gives me $10 million on Monday morning." "She won't sign that, Dad," Chloe said. "She is generous, but she is not an idiot when it comes to business. She reads everything. That is why you are not going to tell her what it is," Preston snapped. "You are going to tell her it is a character reference. Or better yet, tell her it is a co-signing document for a house. Tell her you and Julian found a dream home and you need her backing to get the mortgage approved. She is obsessed with taking care of you. She wants you to be safe. If you tell her it is for a home, she will sign it without reading the fine print." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was not just greed. It was weaponized love. They were planning to use my own devotion as the knife to slit my throat. I cannot do that, Chloe whispered. That is fraud. If you default, she loses everything. She loses her trucks, her drivers. I am not going to default. Preston lied smoothly. I just need the bridge loan. Once the new contracts come in, I will release her from the guarantee. She will never even know. Come on, Chloe. Do you want to be homeless? Do you want Julian to be out on the street? Because that is what happens if I do not get that signature tonight. Do you want to go back to being the poor orphan girl living in a truck stop? There was a long silence. I held my breath waiting. This was the moment. This was the test. After 12 years of sacrifice, after thousands of miles driven, after every bill paid and every tear wiped, this was the moment my sister decided who she was. Please, Chloe. I begged silently in my head. Please say no. Please stand up. Just once. Be the woman I raised you to be. Okay, Chloe said softly. The word was like a physical blow to my chest. It hit me harder than the insults, harder than the exclusion, harder than the theft of the pearls. Okay, Preston repeated, sounding delighted. Good girl. Now wipe your face. Fix your makeup. Go find her. Pull her into a quiet corner. Cry a little bit. Tell her you are so happy, but you are just worried about the house. Hand her the pen. Do not let her read it. Just keep talking while she signs. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. The sadness had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, barren landscape of indifference. I opened the voice memo app. The voice. I hit the red record button. I held the phone up to the crack in the door. So just to be clear, Chloe's voice came through the wood, sounding stronger now that she had made her deal with the devil. I tell her it is for a mortgage for me and Julian. But really, it is a guarantee for your business debt. Exactly, Preston said. And once she signs, you bring the papers straight to me. Do not let her keep a copy, and you promise Julian won't find out. Chloe asked. Julian does not need to know how the sausage is made. Preston laughed. He just needs to enjoy the penthouse. Now go. She is probably sulking in the corner somewhere eating the scraps I gave her. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it Evidence A. I uploaded it to the cloud. I sent a copy to my lawyer, Arthur. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a worker, calloused, strong. They had steered 18-wheelers through blizzards. They had loaded freight when the dock workers were short. They had held a dying mother and raised a frightened child. They were hands that built things, and tonight, they were going to be hands that dismantled things. The sister who drove through snowstorms to pay for a prom dress died in that hallway. The woman who ate peanut butter sandwiches so Chloe could eat sushi died in that hallway. Whatever love I had left for her turned into ash in my mouth. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt. I did not need to wait for Chloe to come find me. I did not need to wait for her fake tears and her lies. I reached out and grabbed the brass handle of the door. It felt cold and heavy. I turned it. The door swung open with a soft click. Preston was standing by the window holding a glass of scotch. Chloe was sitting at the vanity dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. They both froze when they saw me. Viola. Chloe gasped, jumping up. Her face went pale. How long have you been there? Long enough to know that the champagne bill is the least of your problems, I said calmly, stepping into the room. Preston narrowed his eyes. He set his glass down. You should knock. It is rude to barge in on a private family moment. I ignored him. I looked straight at Chloe. She looked beautiful in her $15,000 dress. But all I could see was a stranger. I walked over to the small table where a stack of legal documents sat waiting. I picked them up. Chloe made a move to grab them but stopped when I shot her a look. I flipped through the pages. It was exactly what Preston had said. A commercial loan guarantee. Unlimited liability. If I sign this, I would be responsible for $10 million of Preston Sterling's bad decisions. Is this the mortgage paper? I asked, my voice dripping with mock innocence. For the dream house. Chloe opened her mouth but no sound came out. She looked at Preston for help. Preston stepped forward, putting on his charming smile. Viola, look, we were just talking about you. Chloe mentioned you might be willing to help the young couple get a start. It is just a formality, really. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You know, Preston, I said, looking him in the eye. You were right about one thing in your speech. Preston blinked, confused. What? I am a truck driver, I said, and in my business we have a saying. Check your brakes before you wreck your life. I ripped the papers in half. Then I ripped them again. I let the confetti of legal fraud rain down onto the expensive carpet. Preston's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. You stupid bitch, he snarled, stepping toward me aggressively. Do you have any idea what you just did? I saved my company, I said. And I saved myself. I turned to Chloe. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face for real this time. Viola, please, she whispered. You do not understand. No, Chloe, I said, my voice flat. I understand perfectly. You made a choice. You chose the appearance of wealth over the person who actually gave you wealth. You chose a con man over your sister. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. I just sent a recording of the last 5 minutes to my lawyer, I said. And to the fraud department of the bank listed on those papers. Attempting to coerce a signature by fraud is a felony, Preston. I think the technical term is conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Preston stopped in his tracks. His aggression vanished, replaced by pure terror. You recorded us, he whispered. Every word I said. I looked at my watch. And speaking of banks, I believe my acquisition of your debt portfolio just finalized, which means technically you are standing in my bedroom. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Get out, both of you. The party is over. The air in the bridal suite was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of expensive hairspray and stale lies. I stood in the center of the room looking at my sister. Chloe was trembling, her hands clutching the edges of her designer gown, but her eyes were darting back and forth between me and Preston Sterling. This was it. The crossroads. For 12 years I had been her shield. I had taken the hits so she could stay soft. I had worked until my hands bled so hers could remain manicured. I had created a world where she never had to feel the cold bite of reality. But now reality was standing right next to her, holding a glass of scotch and a stack of torn loan documents. I ignored Preston. He was irrelevant now. He was just a symptom of the disease. Chloe was the patient, and I had one last dose of medicine to offer. Chloe. I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Look at me. She looked up. Her mascara was smeared beneath her eyes, making her look like a tragic doll. You do not have to do this, I said, stepping closer. You heard him. You heard what he said when he thought I wasn't listening. He does not respect you. He does not care about your future. He sees you as bait. He sees you as a signature on a loan. Chloe sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. But I love Julian, she whispered weakly. Does Julian know about this scheme? I asked. Does Julian know his father is trying to trick his new sister-in-law into financing his bankruptcy? Chloe looked down. No, Julian is. He is sensitive. Dad says we have to protect him. Protect him, I repeated, letting the absurdity of the words hang in the air. You are not protecting him, Chloe. You are enabling a fraud. And if you go through with this, if you walk out that door and cut that cake, you are tying yourself to a sinking ship. The Sterling Empire is gone. It is a hollow shell. Do you really want to start your marriage on a foundation of debt and deception? I held out my hand. It was a gesture I had made 1,000 times before, when she fell off her bike, when she was scared of the dark, when she failed a test. Come with me, I said softly. Right now. We will walk out the back door. My truck is parked a mile down the road. It is not a Rolls-Royce, but it is paid for. It is honest. We can go get burgers. We can figure this out together. I have plenty of money, Chloe. You know I do. I can help you get an apartment. I can help you start over. But not like this. Not with these people. For a second, I saw a flicker of the old Chloe, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. She took a step toward me. Her hand reached out. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe she wasn't lost. Maybe the sister bond was stronger than the allure of the country club. But then Preston laughed. It was a cruel, dry sound. "Oh, that is touching," he sneered, swirling the ice in his glass. "Really heartwarming. Go ahead, Chloe. Go with the truck driver. Go back to your little rental apartment. Go back to clipping coupons and pretending you are somebody. Or you can stay here. You can be a Sterling. You can live in the penthouse. You can be the queen of Chicago society." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes locking onto hers. "But remember, Chloe, if you walk out that door, you are walking away from the life you deserve. And for what? For her. For a woman who is clearly just jealous that her little sister surpassed her." The word hung in the air. Jealous. Chloe froze. Her hand stopped inches from mine. She looked at Preston and saw the approval she desperately craved. Then she looked at me and saw the reminder of where she came from. She saw the poverty we had escaped. She saw the struggle. And she hated it. Her face changed. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a hard, ugly sneer that I did not recognize. It was the same expression the bridesmaids had worn in the bathroom. She slapped my hand away. I was so shocked I didn't move. "You are jealous," she spat, her voice rising to a shriek. "That is what this is, isn't it? You cannot stand it." What, I asked quietly. "You cannot stand that I am happy," she screamed. "You have always been like this, playing the martyr. Oh, poor Viola working so hard. Oh, poor Viola sacrificing everything. You love it. You love making me feel like I owe you. You love holding money over my head." "Chloe, that is not true," I said. "It is true," she yelled, stepping closer. "You are miserable, Viola. You are 32 years old alone and you drive a truck for a living. And now I am marrying a Sterling. I am going to be somebody important, and you hate it. You want to drag me back down into the mud with you because you are terrified of being left behind." She was shaking now, but not with fear, with rage. "Dad is right," she said, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "You do not belong here. You never did. You are just common." The word cut deeper than a knife. Common. After everything I had built, after the millions I had earned, after the empire I commanded, to her, I was still just the help. I looked at her one last time. I looked for my sister, but she wasn't there. The girl I raised had died the moment she decided to trade her soul for a penthouse view. "I am giving you a life raft, Chloe," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "This is the last time. Come with me or drown with them." "Get out!" she screamed. "Get out of my wedding!" And then she did something unforgivable. She shoved me. She put both hands on my chest and pushed with all her strength. I wasn't expecting it. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the thick carpet. I hit my shoulder against the doorframe, a sharp pain shooting down my arm. I steadied myself. I stood up straight. I looked at the spot on my blazer where her hands had touched me. I brushed it off. It was a slow, deliberate motion, as if I were brushing away a piece of lint, or a speck of dirt, or a sister. I looked up. My eyes were dry. My heart was a stone. "Okay, Chloe," I said. "You made your choice." I adjusted my lapel. "I will go," I continued. "But I am taking my wedding gift with me." "Gift?" Chloe scoffed, wiping her eyes. "What gift? Another toaster, a set of towels. Keep it. We do not need your charity." I smiled. It was a terrifying smile, one that did not reach my eyes. "Oh, it is much more than a toaster," I said softly. I turned around. I did not look back. I walked out of the bridal suite, leaving the door wide open behind me. I walked down the hallway, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the floor. It sounded like a countdown. I reached the end of the corridor and stepped back into the main foyer. The music from the ballroom was loud, a jazz band playing a cheerful tune that felt grotesque given what had just happened. I was heading for the exit. I just wanted fresh air. I wanted to get to my truck and give the order to end this. But suddenly a figure stepped in front of me, blocking my path. It was Preston. He had run out the back exit of the suite and circled around to cut me off. He stood there blocking the main doors, his face flushed with triumph and greed. "Going somewhere, Viola?" he asked, mocking me. "Running away with your tail between your legs?" "Move, Preston," I said. "Not so fast," he grinned, stepping closer. "I heard you mention a gift. You told Chloe you were taking her wedding gift with you." He held out his hand, palm up, the same greedy gesture his wife had used earlier. "If you brought a check, you leave it here," he said. "That money belongs to the couple, and since I am managing their finances, it belongs to me. Hand it over." I looked at his hand. Then I looked at his face. He really thought he had won. He thought I was leaving in defeat, broken and humiliated. He thought he could bully me one last time and squeeze a few more dollars out of the lemon before throwing the rind away. He had no idea that the lemon was actually a grenade. "You want the gift?" I asked, tilting my head. "Yes," Preston snapped, snapping his fingers. "Give it to me. Do not make me call security. You do not want to be dragged out of here, do you?" I reached into my purse. Preston's eyes lit up. He was expecting an envelope. He was expecting a check with a lot of zeros. I kept my hand inside my bag, my fingers closing around the cold, hard plastic of the remote control for the fleet logistics system. I looked him dead in the eye. "You really want it?" I asked again. Preston laughed. "Stop stalling, Viola. Give me the gift." I pulled my hand out, but it was empty. I smiled. "Okay, Preston," I said. "I will give it to you. But I think it is too big to hand over." I pointed toward the main doors behind him. "You might want to step outside," I said. "It is being delivered right now." And as if on cue, the ground began to vibrate. The low rumble of heavy diesel engines echoed through the walls of the manor, growing louder and louder, until the crystal chandelier above our heads began to shake. Preston frowned, looking over his shoulder. "What is that noise?" "That," I said, stepping past him, "is the sound of your eviction." The heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open with a groan that seemed to cut through the chatter of the wedding guests. I stepped inside. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor with a rhythm that was steady and deliberate. I was not the same woman who had walked out of here an hour ago to cry in the bathroom. I was not the sister who had begged for affection. I was the CEO of V-Line Logistics, and I was walking into a hostile takeover. The room was loud. The jazz band was playing a frenetic, upbeat number that clashed with the cold fury in my veins. Waiters were circulating with trays of champagne that I knew had not been paid for. Guests were laughing, unaware that they were standing on the deck of a sinking ship. Preston Sterling was waiting for me near the center of the room. He was holding court, surrounded by a group of wealthy investors he was trying to impress. When he saw me approaching, his face lit up with a predatory grin. He excused himself from his circle and strode toward me, his chest puffed out like a peacock. He thought he had won. He thought I was coming back to beg for forgiveness. He thought I had the signed loan guarantee in my purse, ready to hand over my life's work to save his reputation. Well, he was half right. I did have something to hand over. I stopped 3 feet in front of him. I did not smile. I did not blink. Preston's grin widened. He raised his voice, making sure the people around us could hear. "Ah, Viola. So glad you decided to rejoin us. I trust you and Chloe had a productive chat. Did you bring the gift?" He emphasized the word gift with a greedy glint in his eyes. I reached into my blazer pocket. I pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy. It felt substantial. To a man desperate for cash, it must have felt like salvation. I held it out. Preston snatched it from my hand before I could even fully extend my arm. He weighed it in his palm, his eyes gleaming. "Excellent," he murmured. "Truly excellent. You know, Viola, I admit I was harsh earlier. But family comes through for family, right?" He turned to the room, raising the envelope high in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice cutting through the music. "Can I have your attention, please?" The band stopped playing. The chatter died down. 300 faces turned toward us. "My new daughter-in-law, sister Viola, has just presented us with a very generous wedding gift," Preston announced. "It is a testament to the unity of our families, and since we are all friends here, I think we should share in the joy." He was going to open it. Right there, in front of everyone. He wanted to humiliate me one last time by showing off the check. He wanted to prove to his investors that he had fresh capital. He wanted to brandish my money like a weapon. I said nothing. I just crossed my arms and waited. Preston tore open the seal. He reached inside with dramatic flair. He pulled out the stack of papers. He expected to see a cashier's check or a signed bank draft. Instead, he saw a sheet of paper with a bright red banner across the top. His smile froze. He blinked. He squinted at the paper, as if trying to decipher a foreign language. I watched as his eyes scanned the text. I knew exactly what it said because I had pulled the copies from the public utility database myself just 20 minutes ago. Final notice. Service disconnection scheduled. He flipped to the next page. Water service termination. Past due balance, $4,000. He flipped to the third page. Internet and cable revocation. Account in default. His hands started to shake. The papers rustled in the silent room. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling with confusion and rage. "What is this garbage?" I took a step forward. My voice was calm, clear, and loud enough to reach the back tables. "It is your mail, Preston," I said. "I found it in the pile of bills you have been hiding from your investors. I thought you might want to see them before the lights go out." Literally. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Vanderhoven, the wife of the city's biggest banker, lean over to her husband and cover her mouth. "The lights," Preston stammered, looking up at the chandelier as if expecting it to fall. "You haven't paid the electric bill in 4 months," I continued relentlessly. "Or the water bill. Or the internet. I thought since you were so concerned about appearances, you should know that the power company is sending a truck to cut the line at midnight." The whispers grew into a murmur. Preston's face turned a deep, violent shade of crimson. He crumbled the papers in his fist. You insolent!" he sputtered. "How dare you!" he roared, throwing the crumpled papers at my feet. "How dare you bring this trash into my house? This is a mistake. My secretary, that incompetent woman, she must have missed a filing." He looked around wildly, trying to find someone to blame. "It is a clerical error," he shouted to the guests, who were now looking at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Just a mix-up at the office. We are switching accounts. You know how banks are?" He turned back to me, his eyes bulging. "And you did this on purpose. You are trying to sabotage my son's wedding because you are a bitter, lonely spinster. You are a cheap wretch, Viola. You drive a garbage truck and you have a garbage soul." I did not flinch. "I paid for the wedding, Preston," I reminded him coolly. "I paid for the food these people are eating. I paid for the dress your daughter-in-law is wearing. The only thing cheap in this room is the man standing in front of me who steals from his own children." That was the breaking point. Preston lost whatever shred of sanity he had left. He pointed a shaking finger at the main entrance. "Security!" he screamed. His voice cracked. "Security, get in here!" 2 large men in black suits, who had been standing by the entrance, began to move toward us. They were big, menacing, and clearly hired to intimidate. "Get this woman out of my sight!" Preston yelled, spitting as he spoke. "Drag her out! Throw her in the mud where she belongs! And call the police! I want her arrested for trespassing!" The guests gasped. Chloe, who had just entered the room, let out a cry, but she did not move to help me. She just covered her mouth and watched. I stood my ground. I did not run. I did not fight. The security guards closed the distance. Their heavy boots thudded against the floor. They were 5 feet away. Then 3. Preston was grinning now, a manic, twisted look of triumph on his face. "Goodbye, Viola," he sneered. The lead guard, a man with a thick neck and a scar above his eye, reached out. But he did not grab me. He reached past me and put a heavy hand on Preston's shoulder. Preston froze. "Excuse me," he snapped. "What are you doing? She's the one you need to remove." The guard ignored him. He turned to me. He stood up straight. He adjusted his jacket. And then he did something that made the entire room go silent. He bowed his head slightly. "Madam Chairwoman." The guard said, his voice deep and respectful. I looked at him. I recognized the lapel pin on his jacket. It was a small gold V, the logo of the private security firm that V-Line Logistics had acquired last year. I nodded. "Captain." Preston looked between us, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Madam, what? What is going on? I hired you. I pay your salary." "Actually, sir," the guard said, turning to look at Preston with a look of pure disdain. "You haven't paid our invoice in 3 months. Your contract was voided this morning due to non-payment." Preston turned pale. "Then, why are you here?" "Because we were rehired an hour ago," the guard said, "by the new owner of the property." "New owner," Preston whispered. The guard turned back to me. He leaned in close so only I and Preston could hear. "Your orders are ready, Madam Chairwoman," he said. "My team is in position. The trucks are blocking the exits. No assets leave this property without your permission. We are ready to execute the eviction protocol on your command." I looked at Preston. I watched the realization dawn on him. I watched his world crumble in real time. He wasn't the king of the castle anymore. He was a squatter, and I was the landlord. I smiled, and this time it was genuine. "Thank you, Captain," I said. "Proceed." Preston was still staring at the security guard, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. The words, "Madam Chairwoman," hung in the air between us, heavier than the humidity outside. He looked at the guard, and then he looked at me, and for the first time in 12 years, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. It was the fear of a man who realizes he is standing on a trapdoor that has just been unlatched. "Proceed," I repeated, my voice cutting through the tension, and then the universe decided to agree with me. There was a loud electrical pop that sounded like a gunshot. It came from the main breaker panel hidden behind the velvet curtains near the kitchen. Then came the darkness. It did not happen in sections. It happened all at once. The massive crystal chandelier above our heads, which had been blazing with 500 bulbs, died instantly. The sconces on the walls went black. The uplighting on the architectural columns vanished. The music from the jazz band strangled into silence as their amplifiers lost power. The hum of the industrial air conditioning units, which had been fighting the Chicago summer heat, groaned and spun down to a halt. For a second there was total, absolute silence. Then came the screams. They started as gasps from the women in their evening gowns, then escalated into full-blown panic. In the pitch blackness, the guests were no longer the elite of society. They were just frightened people in a dark room. Phones began to light up, creating ghostly blue faces in the void. "What is happening?" Preston roared, his voice cracking. "Turn the lights back on! Who turned off the lights?" I stood perfectly still. I did not need a light. I knew exactly where I was standing. I was standing on my own property. I closed my eyes and breathed in. The air suddenly felt different. Without the artificial chill of the AC, the humidity began to creep back in. But to me, it did not feel oppressive. It felt like justice. Preston fumbled for his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam danced wildly across the room until it landed on the face of the venue manager, a frantic-looking man named Gerald who was trying to radio his maintenance team. Gerald, Preston screamed, lunging toward him. "Fix this. I am paying you a fortune. Why is it dark in here?" "Mr. Sterling." Gerald stammered, shielding his eyes from the glare of Preston's phone. The main grid is dead. The transformer just blew. Or someone cut the line manually. Cut the line, Preston shouted. Well, do not just stand there, you idiot. Turn on the backup generator. This is a luxury venue. You have a backup generator, don't you? Gerald looked down at his clipboard, his face pale in the flashlight beam. We do, sir, Gerald whispered. But what? Preston yelled, grabbing Gerald by the lapels of his tuxedo. Mr. Sterling, we cannot turn on the generator, Gerald said, his voice trembling. The rental company came by yesterday and put a lock on the fuel intake. A lock? Preston froze. What are you talking about? You haven't paid the rental fee for the generator since February, Sir Gerald said. They disabled it. They said they would unlock it when the balance was cleared. I told you this last week. I left 3 messages with your assistant. Preston let go of Gerald, pushing him away. That is a lie, he hissed. Everyone is lying to me today. He spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, searching for me. Viola, he screamed. Viola, where are you? You did this. You bribed them, didn't you? You paid someone to cut the power. I stepped into the beam of his light. I did not flinch. I did not have to bribe anyone, Preston. I said, my voice calm and steady. I just stopped paying your bills. The power company does not care about your social status. They care about the check clearing, and when the check bounced, they pulled the plug. Welcome to the reality you have been avoiding. You are insane, Preston shouted. You ruined the wedding. Look at this. He waved his light around the room. The guests were huddled in groups, whispering frantically. Some were using their phones to find the exits. Chloe was sitting on a chair near the cake, sobbing into her hands while Julian tried to comfort her by blaming the staff. It was chaos. It was humiliating. It was perfect. But I wasn't done. Listen, I said, holding up a hand. Preston blinked. What? Listen, I said again. At first, there was only the sound of nervous chatter and Chloe's crying. But then a new sound began to emerge from the distance. It was a low rumble. Deep. Guttural. It vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up through the soles of my shoes. It was a sound I knew better than the sound of my own heartbeat. It was the sound of a Detroit Diesel Series 60 engine. And it wasn't just one. The rumble grew louder. It wasn't a car engine. It was heavy machinery. The kind of power that moves mountains. The kind of power that keeps America running. The guests stopped talking. They looked around, confused. The floor began to shake. The wine glasses on the tables rattled against each other, creating a sinister chiming noise. Is that an earthquake? Someone shouted. No. Preston whispered, his face turning the color of ash. That is not an earthquake. The roar grew deafening. It sounded like a freight train was barreling down the driveway. I checked my watch. Right on time. My drivers were the best in the business. Precision was our trademark. The sound surrounded the building now. The engines were idling right outside the main entrance and the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that lined the front of the ballroom. What is going on? Julian yelled, standing up and leaving Chloe's side. Who is out there? Preston looked at me. He knew. In that moment, he finally understood the scale of his mistake. He realized that calling me a truck driver was not an insult. It was a warning he had failed to heed. I smiled at him in the darkness. Let there be light, I whispered. Outside, the lead driver hit the switch. Boom. 10 sets of high-intensity LED floodlights mounted on the grill guards of 10 massive semi-trucks turned on simultaneously. The effect was blinding. The light punched through the glass windows with the force of a physical explosion. It flooded the ballroom, washing out the darkness instantly. It was brighter than the sun. It was brighter than the chandeliers ever could be. The guests screamed, shielding their eyes. The light was harsh, industrial, and unforgiving. It exposed everything. It illuminated the water stains on the ceiling that Preston had tried to hide in the shadows. It highlighted the cheap fabric of the rental tablecloths. It showed the fear on Preston's face in high definition. Through the glass wall, we could see the silhouettes of the trucks. They were black giants lined up bumper to bumper, forming an impenetrable wall of steel around the entrance. The logo V-Line Logistics was emblazoned on the side of every cab, gleaming in the reflection. They were not just trucks, they were a siege engine. Preston stood there blinking against the glare, his hands trembling uncontrollably. "My God," he whispered. I walked over to the window. I stood in front of the center truck, blocking the light with my body, so that my shadow stretched long and dark across the room, reaching all the way to where Chloe sat. I turned back to face them. Backlit by the headlights, I knew I looked like a wraith. I looked like Judgment Day. "I warned you, Preston," I said, my voice echoing in the silent, terrified room. "I told you the gift was too big to bring inside." I pointed to the fleet outside. "My drivers are here to help you move out. And since you like to do things in style, I brought the whole convoy." I looked at the guests who were staring at me with a mixture of awe and horror. "Please finish your drinks," I said, "but do it quickly. The eviction crew starts loading the furniture in 5 minutes." Chloe looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at the trucks. She looked at the power I commanded. "Viola," she whimpered. I didn't answer. I just stood there, bathed in the light of my empire, watching their house of cards finally collapse. The darkness in the ballroom was no longer empty. It was filled with a low-frequency vibration that rattled the silverware on the tables and shook the crystals in the dead chandelier. The sound was not chaotic like the screaming of the guests. It was rhythmic. It was mechanical. It was the sound of raw, unadulterated power idling just outside the glass. The guests who had been huddled in fear began to move toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the front of the Sterling Manor. Curiosity had overcome their terror. They pressed their faces against the glass, shielding their eyes from the blinding wall of white LED light that was pouring into the room. What they saw made the breath catch in their throats. It was not the police. It was not the fire department. It was an armada. Lined up in a perfect semicircle around the entrance of the manor were 20 massive semi-trucks. But these were not the dirty, road-weary trucks you see on the highway. These were brand-new Peterbilt 389s, custom-built and polished to a black mirror finish. Their chrome stacks shot flames of blue exhaust into the night air. Their running lights glowed like the eyes of predatory beasts. On the side of every single cab, painted in gold leaf that shimmered under the floodlights, was a logo that every person in Chicago recognized. A stylized V with a lightning bolt cutting through it, followed by the words, "V-Line Logistics." And right there in the center of the formation, leading this legion of steel giants, sat my beat-up 1998 Ford F-150. The same truck the valet had sneered at. The same truck Chloe had begged me to hide. It sat there like a general commanding an army of tanks. Inside the ballroom, the panic shifted into confusion and awe. Julian, the groom, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He pressed his hands against the glass, leaving sweaty palm prints. His face, which had been flushed with arrogance all night, suddenly drained of all color. He looked like a ghost. "Oh my God," he whispered. His voice was trembling so hard it was barely audible. "What is it?" Julian, Chloe asked, grabbing his arm. "Who are they? Why are they blocking the driveway?" Julian did not answer her. He just stared at the gold logo on the door of the lead truck. "That is V-Line," he stammered. "That is the V-Line fleet." "So what?" Chloe snapped. "Call the police. Tell them to move." "You do not understand," Julian said, turning to look at his father. "Dad, do you see that? That is V-Line Logistics. They are the biggest freight mover in the Midwest. They just bought out the Port Authority contract last month. They are everywhere. They are the company that is eating up all the small operators in Chicago." Preston Sterling was standing a few feet away. He was not looking at the trucks. He was looking at me. He was doing the math in his head. He was connecting the dots that he should have connected years ago if he had bothered to look past the mud on my boots. V-line Julian whispered again, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. V for Viola. The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the deep thrumming of 20 diesel engines idling in unison, a sound that felt like the heartbeat of a sleeping dragon. Chloe let out a small choked sound. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, that is impossible. She drives a truck, Julian. She drives that piece of junk out there. She does not own the company. She is just a driver." Julian looked at her with pity and disgust. "Drivers do not command a fleet like this, Chloe. Drivers do not shut down the power grid of a private estate. Drivers do not buy $4 million of debt before breakfast." He pulled his arm away from her grasp. "We are dead," he whispered. "We are absolutely dead." I watched them. I watched the fear ripple through the room like a cold wind. I watched the wealthy socialites who had laughed at my sandwich suddenly look at me with terrified respect. Money talks, but power roars. And right now my power was roaring outside their window. I checked my watch. The time for theatrics was over. It was time for the main event. I reached into my pocket and pressed the button on my key fob. Outside, the headlights of my F-150 flashed once, and then the engines cut. All 20 trucks turned off at the exact same second. The silence that followed was sudden and shocking. It was the silence of a gavel coming down in a courtroom. The double doors at the main entrance of the ballroom began to open. They did not fly open. They opened slowly, smoothly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. The floodlights from the trucks were still on, positioned perfectly to shine through the open doors. The light poured into the room, creating a blinding white backdrop. I stepped into the doorway. To the people inside, I was just a silhouette, a dark figure cut out of the light. My shadow stretched long and thin across the marble floor, reaching all the way to the stage where the wedding cake sat uncut. My shadow engulfed the Sterling family, swallowing them in darkness while I stood in the light. I heard the click of my heels on the floor. It was the only sound in the world. I walked forward, moving against the glare. As I stepped further into the room, the light caught the edges of my suit. It caught the gold watch on my wrist. It caught the cold determination in my eyes. I stopped 10 feet away from Preston. He looked small now. The bluster was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked like exactly what he was. A man standing in a house he no longer owned, wearing a suit he couldn't afford, throwing a party for a son he had failed. I looked at the guests. "I hope you enjoyed the show," I said, my voice calm, but amplified by the acoustics of the silent room. "I apologize for the interruption. But as the new owner of this property, I have a strict policy against unauthorized gatherings, especially ones hosted by tenants who are in default." I turned my gaze to Chloe. She was trembling, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. "You wanted a wedding to remember, little sister," I said softly. I gestured to the wall of black trucks visible through the open doors. "Well, here is your parade." I turned back to the security captain who was waiting by my side. "Captain," I said. "Yes, Madam Chairwoman, you may begin the removal process. Please start with the head table. I believe the father of the groom is sitting in my chair." I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to scream. The invasion had begun, and the Sterling dynasty was officially over. The blinding white light from the 20 semi-trucks outside washed over the ballroom, turning the wedding reception into an interrogation room. I stood in the center of the glare, my shadow stretching long and sharp across the floor. Preston Sterling stood before me, blinking rapidly, his face a mask of confusion and rising panic. He opened his mouth to speak, probably to demand that I leave again, but I raised a single hand. I did not need a microphone. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of 300 people holding their breath at once. I nodded to the security captain standing to my right. He reached into a sleek metal case and pulled out a portable high-definition projector. He placed it on the table right next to the uncut wedding cake. With a soft hum, the device powered on. It projected a massive image onto the white wall behind the stage directly over the banner that said Julian and Chloe forever. The first image appeared. It was high resolution and undeniable. It was a photograph of me. But I was not wearing the mud-splattered suit I had on tonight. I was wearing a tailored white blazer and a gold hard hat. I was standing next to the mayor of Chicago holding a pair of giant ceremonial scissors. We were cutting a ribbon in front of a massive glass building. The caption under the photo read, "V-Line Logistics opens new $50 million global headquarters." A gasp rippled through the crowd like a wave. I saw Chloe's eyes go wide. She covered her mouth with her hand. She had never seen that photo. She never asked about my work. She never asked about my life. I clicked the remote in my hand. The slide changed. The second image was a magazine cover. It was the current issue of Forbes. The headline was bold and black, "The Silent Queen of Transport." Underneath was a profile of me sitting in my office overlooking the city skyline. The subhead read, "How Viola Davis Built an Empire from a Single Truck." Preston Sterling stared at the wall. His face went slack. The glass of scotch he had been holding slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered. The sound was explosive in the quiet room. Dark amber liquid splashed onto his polished shoes, but he did not even flinch. He was paralyzed. I took a step closer to him. The sound of my heels on the floor was like the ticking of a clock counting down his final seconds. "You laughed at my truck, Preston," I said, my voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "You called it a piece of junk. You told your guests I was garbage because I drove a Ford instead of a Ferrari." I pointed to the image of the headquarters on the wall. "That truck you despise so much," I continued. "That truck was the first brick in this building. That truck has driven more miles than you have flown in your private jet. And that dirty, beat-up pickup truck carries cargo worth more in a single afternoon than this entire estate is worth in a year." I looked around the room, making eye contact with the wealthy socialites who had snickered at me earlier. "You measure worth by the shine of a shoe or the label on a dress," I said. "I measure worth by equity, by ownership, by the fact that I do not owe a single cent to anyone in this world." I turned back to Preston. He was trembling now. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for an escape, looking for a way to spin this, looking for a lie that could save him. But there was nowhere to hide. The light from my trucks exposed everything. "You called me a freeloader," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You said I was eating your food." I reached into the leather bag the security captain was holding. I pulled out a thick blue legal folder. It was heavy. It was the kind of folder that contained the fate of businesses and the ruin of men. I tossed it onto the table in front of Preston. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the spilled scotch and broken glass. "Read it," I commanded. Preston looked at the folder. He looked at me. He looked at the trucks outside. I do not understand," he stammered. "Read it," I shouted. The force of my voice made him jump. He reached out with a shaking hand and opened the cover. I watched his eyes scan the first page. I watched the color drain from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. I watched his knees buckle slightly as the reality of his situation hit him with the force of a freight train. The document on top was a transfer of debt instrument. It was stamped with the official seal of the First National Bank of Chicago, and right below that was the stamp of the acquiring party. V-Line Logistics. "You see, Preston," I said, walking slowly around him, circling him like a shark. "I have friends in banking, too. And when I had my team run a background check on you this morning, we found something very interesting. We found that you are not rich. You are drowning." I stopped directly in front of him. "You haven't paid your commercial mortgage in 8 months. You are in default on the construction loans. You are in default on the personal lines of credit. The bank was getting ready to foreclose on Monday. They were terrified they would never get their money back." I smiled. A cold, hard smile. so I made them an offer. I offered to buy your entire debt portfolio for cash. Today. This morning. While you were getting your hair done and making speeches about your legacy, I was writing a check to own your legacy. Preston looked up from the paper. There were tears in his eyes now. Terror. You bought my debt, he whispered. I bought you, I corrected him. I own the mortgage on this house. I own the loans on your construction company. I own the lease on your car. I leaned in close. I am your bank now, Preston, and I am recalling the loans. I pointed to the bottom of the page where the total amount was listed in bold black numbers. $4.5 million, I said. Plus interest. Plus penalties. I gestured to the ballroom. And let us not forget tonight. The catering. The flowers. The staff. I just paid the venue manager $85,000 to settle your account so he wouldn't call the police. I added that to your tab. I did the math for him loud and clear. That brings the total to $4,585,000, I said. I looked at my watch. It is now 10:30 p.m. Banking hours are over. But I am willing to make an exception. I held out my hand. Pay me, I said. Write me a check. Right now. $4.5 million. If the check clears, you can stay. You can keep your house. You can finish your party. Preston stared at my hand. He looked down at his shoes. He looked at his wife Beatrice, who was clutching her pearl necklace, looking like she was about to faint. I do not have it, he whispered. His voice was broken. I need time. The investors. I do not care about investors, I snapped. I am the creditor, and my terms are immediate payment. I waited 5 seconds. 5 seconds of excruciating silence. You are in default, I said, which means I am exercising my right to foreclose. Immediately. I turned to the security captain. Begin the eviction. Suddenly there was a shriek. A blur of white satin rushed across the room. It was Chloe. She threw herself at my feet. She did not just run over. She collapsed. She grabbed my legs, wrapping her arms around my knees in a desperate embrace. Her expensive wedding dress pooled on the floor, soaking up the spilled scotch and broken glass. Viola, please, she sobbed, her face buried in my pantsuit. Please do not do this. I looked down at her. 10 minutes ago she had shoved me. She had called me jealous. She had called me common. Now she was clinging to me like a drowning rat. Viola, look at me, she cried, looking up, her makeup streaming down her face. I am your sister. I am your baby sister. You promised Mom. You promised you would take care of me. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was playing the sister card. She was using the memory of our dead mother, the very memory she had dishonored, to try and manipulate me one last time. She thought tears would work. She thought begging would work. Because for 12 years that is all it took. One tear, and Viola opened the checkbook. One sob, and Viola fixed the problem. But she forgot one thing. She had told me to leave. She had told me I did not belong. I looked down at her with a detachment that surprised even me. I did not feel pity. I felt disgust. Viola, please, she begged, tightening her grip. We can fix this. I am sorry. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. Just tell them to stop. Tell the trucks to leave. You are rich. You have so much money. This is nothing to you. Please do not ruin my wedding. I reached down. For a second she thought I was going to hug her. Her eyes lit up with hope. I took her hands and peeled them off my legs. I did it firmly, without gentleness. I stepped back, putting distance between us. You are right, Chloe. I said, my voice flat. I am rich, and you are right about something else. I did promise Mom I would take care of you. I looked at Preston, who was now slumped in a chair looking defeated. Then I looked back at Chloe. But Mom never asked me to finance a fraud, I said. And she certainly never raised us to be liars. I brushed off my pants where she had touched me. I am taking care of you, I said. I am teaching you the most expensive lesson of your life. I turned to the guests. You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises, I announced. Anyone remaining after that will be considered a trespasser on private property. I looked at Chloe one last time. She was still on the floor weeping into the ruins of her wedding. Get up, Chloe, I said. You wanted to be a sterling. Well, now you are one. You are homeless and bankrupt just like them. I turned my back on her and walked toward the door. The sound of her wailing followed me, but I did not stop. The eviction had begun. I looked down at Chloe, who was still kneeling on the floor amidst the ruin of her wedding dress. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, begging for mercy. She looked so innocent, so fragile. It was the same look she had used for 12 years to get whatever she wanted. But today, I wasn't looking at my little sister. I was looking at a stranger who had tried to sign my life away. You say you love me, Chloe? I said, my voice echoing in the silent ballroom. You say you were just stressed. You say you didn't mean to hurt me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and connected it via Bluetooth to the high-end sound system that was still powered by the emergency battery backup of my trucks outside. Then let us listen to how much you love me, I said. I hit play. The sound of Chloe's voice filled the room. It was crisp and clear, recorded just an hour ago in the bridal suite. She is simple, Dad. There is a difference. She just trusts me. She has always done whatever I asked. Chloe's face went white. She scrambled to her feet, reaching for the phone. Viola, stop, she screamed. Do not play that. I held the phone out of her reach. The recording continued. I will get her to do it. I just need time. Once the wedding is over, I will tell her I am pregnant or something. She is obsessed with family. She will sign anything if she thinks it is for a baby. The gasp from the audience was audible. The guests looked at Chloe with pure disgust. Even the most cynical socialites were shocked by the calculated cruelty of using a fake pregnancy to defraud a sister. But the reaction I was waiting for came from Julian. The groom was standing by the cake table, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. He listened to Preston's voice on the recording, confirming the bankruptcy and the plan to use the loan to save the drowning business. If she signs this, the bank gives me $10 million on Monday morning. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Julian turned to Chloe. He did not look like a loving husband. He looked like a man who had just realized he bought a winning lottery ticket only to find out it was a forgery. You told me you were rich, Julian whispered, his voice trembling with rage. You told me your family had assets. You told me this wedding was just a formality before we got the trust fund. Julian, please, Chloe stammered, reaching for his hand. It does not matter. We love each other. Do not touch me, he shouted, shoving her away so hard she stumbled back into the table. You are broke, your father is broke, and you tried to trick your sister into paying for my life because you knew you couldn't afford me. He looked at Preston. And you, he spat. You sat in my office and told me the construction business was booming. You lied to my face. I married into this family because I thought it was a merger, not a charity case. Julian, stop it, Preston yelled. We can still fix this. We cannot fix anything. Julian screamed, tearing the boutonniere off his lapel and throwing it on the floor. I am not going down with your ship. I am calling my lawyer. I want an annulment. The marriage license hasn't been filed yet. As far as I am concerned, this never happened. He turned to leave, but Chloe grabbed his arm, dragging on him. Julian, no, do not leave me. Get off me, you parasite, he snarled. He pushed her again, and this time she fell onto the floor right next to her father. Then the accusations started flying. Beatrice started screaming at Preston for losing the house. Preston screamed at Chloe for not getting my signature fast enough. Julian screamed at everyone. It was a Shark Tank. And they were eating each other alive. I stood there watching them. This was the family that thought they were better than me. This was the dynasty that thought I was trash. Now they were tearing each other apart over money that never existed. Enough, I said. My voice was not loud, but it commanded authority. They all stopped and looked at me. I checked my watch. The entertainment is over, I announced, and so is your time here. I looked at the security captain. Open the doors, I ordered. I turned back to the Sterling family huddled in their misery on the dance floor. You have 10 minutes, I said, my voice cold as ice. 10 minutes to go upstairs, pack your personal effects, and get out of my building. But where will we go? Chloe cried. I do not know, I said, shrugging. And I do not care. But I suggest you hurry, because in exactly 10 minutes my crew is coming in to clear out the trash. I paused and looked at each of them in the eye. And when I say trash, I am not talking about the furniture. I am talking about you. I turned and walked away, leaving them scrambling toward the stairs in a panic. But I had one last stop to make before I left. I walked toward the corner of the room where Beatrice Sterling was trying to hide behind a large potted palm. She was clutching her purse to her chest, hoping to slip away unnoticed in the chaos. But I saw her, and I saw what was sparkling on her ears. Mrs. Sterling, I said, stepping into her path. She jumped, clutching her chest. Viola. Please, she whimpered. I am just leaving. I am going to my sister's house. I do not want any trouble. I looked at her. She looked old and pathetic under the harsh glare of the floodlights. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the trembling fear of a woman who had lost her shield of wealth. I am glad you are leaving, I said, stepping closer. But you are forgetting something. She clutched her ears, covering them with her hands. No, she whispered. Please. They are all I have to look respectable. They are not yours. I said, my voice dropping to a growl. They belong to a woman who worked herself to death so her children could eat. They belong to a woman who had dignity, something you will never understand. I held out my hand. Give them to me. Beatrice shook her head, backing away. No, you can afford 1,000 pairs. Let me keep them. Just this one thing. I did not have time for this. I did not have patience for thieves. I reached out. Beatrice tried to turn her head, but I was faster. I grabbed the left earring. I didn't unclasp it gently like I had done in the bathroom. I pulled. There was a sharp snap. Beatrice shrieked in pain, clutching her earlobe. A tiny drop of blood welled up red and bright against her pale skin. I grabbed the right one. She tried to bat my hand away, but I caught her wrist and held it tight. I yanked the second pearl free. You are hurting me, she screamed. You hurt me for 12 years, I said, staring into her eyes. Consider this a down payment on the karma you owe. I released her. She stumbled back, holding her bleeding ears, looking at me with pure hatred. You are a monster, she hissed. I looked at the pearls in my hand. They were warm. They were safe. I wiped a smudge of her foundation off one of them with my thumb. No, Beatrice, I said calmly. I am just the repo man. And I always collect. I turned away from her, walking toward a large mirror in the hallway. I took the pearls and put them back in my ears where they belonged. I adjusted my blazer. I fixed my hair. I looked at my reflection. I didn't see the tired truck driver anymore. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out made of steel. I looked powerful. I looked dangerous. I looked like a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. Suddenly, the sound of sirens cut through the night air. Blue and red lights flashed against the windows, mixing with the white floodlights of my trucks. Preston Sterling came running down the stairs carrying a suitcase. He saw the police cars pulling up the driveway, and a look of relief washed over his face. Thank God, he shouted, pointing at me. Officer over here! Arrest her! She is trespassing. She assaulted my wife. 2 police officers walked into the ballroom, but they did not look at me. They walked straight past me. They walked up to Preston. Preston Sterling, the lead officer asked. Yes, that is me, Preston said, puffing out his chest. I want to file charges against this woman. Mr. Sterling, the officer said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. You are under arrest. Preston froze. What? For what? Tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. The officer listed calmly, spinning Preston around and slamming him against the wall. What Preston screamed as the cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. "This is a mistake. I am innocent." The officer tightened the cuffs. "We received a very detailed file this evening, Mr. Sterling, including recordings of you conspiring to defraud a loan guarantor and ledger books showing you have been hiding assets from the IRS for 5 years. It is all there." Preston looked up. He looked at me across the room. "You," he whispered, "you sent them the books?" I smiled. I stood there wearing my mother's pearls, looking untouchable. "I told you, Preston," I said. "I bought your debt. That means I bought your files too. I read everything." The officers dragged him toward the door. Chloe ran down the stairs screaming, "Daddy, no," but the officers blocked her path. I watched them drag him out. I watched the man who called me a parasite get thrown into the back of a police car like a common criminal. I walked out onto the front steps of the manor. The rain had stopped. The air was crisp and clean. My drivers were waiting by their trucks. The security captain nodded to me. I looked at the house one last time. It was just a building now, empty, cold. I walked down the steps past the crying bride, past the arrested father, past the bleeding mother. I climbed into the driver's seat of my Ford F-150. I put the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a sound of freedom. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I shifted into gear and drove into the night, leaving the wreckage of the Sterling family behind me in the dust. The night air outside Sterling Manor was cold, but to me it felt like the first breath of spring. I sat in the back seat of my company's executive sedan, a sleek black Phantom that smelled of leather and success. My driver, Marcus, the same man who had been forced to eat a sandwich with me in the kitchen hours earlier, was now behind the wheel, wearing a genuine smile. I rolled down the window just an inch. I wanted to hear it. Not the music, not the speeches. I wanted to hear the sound of consequences. On the paved driveway, the scene was chaotic. The guests who had been sipping champagne 20 minutes ago were now rushing to their cars, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. But they were not leaving quietly. Dozens of them had their phones out. The flashes of cameras strobed in the darkness like lightning. They were live streaming. They were posting stories. The downfall of the Sterling family was being broadcast in real time to the entire city of Chicago. In the center of this digital storm stood the family that had tried to destroy me. They looked small. They looked pathetic. Preston was gone, taken away in the back of a squad car. Beatrice was sitting on a Louis Vuitton suitcase by the curb, holding a handkerchief to her bleeding ears, weeping hysterically. But the most tragic figure was Chloe. My sister was standing in the mud. It was poetic, really. When I arrived, she had been ashamed of the mud on my boots. Now the hem of her $15,000 Vera Wang gown was soaked in brown sludge. The intricate lace was ruined. The white satin was stained. She looked like a broken doll that had been discarded in a gutter. She was reaching out for Julian. "Julian," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "Please wait. We can go to a hotel. We can figure this out." Julian turned on her. The handsome face I had seen in the engagement photos was twisted into a mask of pure loathing. He was holding a garment bag over his shoulder and he looked like he wanted to hit her. "Get away from me," he screamed. "You are toxic, Chloe. Your whole family is toxic. Do you see this? Do you see what is happening? My father is going to read about this in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow. My reputation is ruined because I married a fraud." "I am not a fraud," Chloe cried, grabbing his sleeve. "I am a victim too. Viola did this to us. She is the crazy one." Julian shook her off so hard she slipped. She fell onto the wet asphalt landing on her hands and knees. The mud splattered up onto her face. "She is not crazy," Julian spat, looking down at her. "She is a genius. She played you, Chloe. She played all of us. And honestly, I do not blame her. If I had a sister like you, I would have evicted you too." He turned and walked toward his car, leaving her kneeling in the dirt. Chloe watched him go. Then she slowly turned her head. She looked at the line of semi-trucks that were still idling their engines, a wall of steel and light. And then she saw my car. She saw me sitting in the back seat. Our eyes met through the tinted glass. I saw her mouth move. I saw her shout my name. Viola! She scrambled to her feet. She started running toward the car. Her dress was heavy with mud, dragging behind her like an anchor. She looked desperate. She looked terrified. Viola, wait! She screamed, waving her arms. Viola, please, I have nowhere to go. I looked at her. I remembered the little girl I had carried on my shoulders. I remembered the teenager I had tutored. I remembered the woman who had shoved me and called me common. She reached the car. She banged her hands against the window, leaving muddy smears on the pristine glass. Open the door, she begged. I am sorry. I will sign anything. I will do anything. Just take me with you. Do not leave me here with them. I looked at the mud on the window. It blocked my view of her face. I picked up the glass of vintage red wine that had been waiting for me in the center console. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The taste was rich and complex with notes of dark cherry and oak. It tasted like victory. I reached for the intercom button. Marcus, I said calmly. Let us go. Yes, Madam Chairwoman, Marcus replied. He put the car in drive. The car began to move. Chloe ran alongside it for a few steps, her hands sliding off the glass. Viola, no, she screamed. You cannot do this. We are family. I did not turn my head. I stared straight ahead at the road illuminated by the headlights. I took my phone out of my purse. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to the name Chloe. I pressed block caller. Then I pressed delete contact. The car accelerated, leaving the shouting and the flashing lights behind. I watched in the rearview mirror as the figure in the white dress grew smaller and smaller until she was just a speck of dirt in the distance. Finally, we turned a corner and she was gone. I leaned back in the leather seat. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 12 years, the noise in my head stopped. The worry stopped. The obligation stopped. I was alone. And it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. 3 months had passed since the night of the wedding. The scandal had dominated the local news for weeks. The headlines were brutal: the Sterling collapse, the wedding day arrest, the rise of the Iron Lady of Logistics. I didn't read them. I was too busy building. I stood on the front lawn of the property formerly known as Sterling Manor. The wrought iron gates were still there, but the pretension was gone. The gold leaf statues of lions had been removed. The overgrown hedges had been trimmed back to let the light in. Above the main entrance, a new sign hung in bronze letters. The Harrison Center for Youth Excellence. It was named after my parents. The ballroom where I had been humiliated was now a brightly lit cafeteria and assembly hall. The bridal suite where Chloe had tried to defraud me was now a counseling center for teenagers aging out of the foster care system. The bedrooms upstairs were dormitories for scholarship students who needed a safe place to live while they finished their degrees. I walked through the garden. The sound of silence had been replaced by the sound of laughter. A group of kids were playing basketball on the new court I had installed over the old helipad. It was chaotic. It was loud. It was real. Ms. Davis. I turned around. My assistant Sarah was walking toward me holding a tablet and a stack of mail. The press is ready for you, she said, smiling. The photographer from Business Week wants to get the cover shot in front of the new wing. I nodded, adjusting my blazer. I was wearing white today. Not a wedding dress, but a power suit. Sharp, clean, unapologetic. I will be right there, I said. Oh, and one more thing, Sarah said, hesitating slightly. She pulled a crumpled envelope from the bottom of the stack. This came to the corporate office today. It was marked personal, but, well, the handwriting looked familiar, so security scanned it. I took the envelope. It was cheap, thin paper, the kind you buy at a gas station. The handwriting was jagged and hurried. I recognized it immediately. It was Chloe. I looked at the return address. It wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't a condo. It was a motel on the outskirts of the city, a place known for hourly rates and broken dreams. I felt a faint tug in my chest, a ghost of an old instinct. Is she okay? Sarah asked, watching my face. The report said she is working double shifts as a waitress at a diner near the interstate. Julian annulled the marriage and left her with nothing. Her father is looking at 5 years in prison. She is. She is pretty desperate, Miss Davis. I held the letter. I could feel the thickness of the pages inside. I knew exactly what it would say. It would be a mix of apologies, excuses, and requests. She would need money for rent. She would need money for a lawyer. She would need money to start over. She wanted me to be the safety net again. I looked at the kids playing basketball. One of them, a tall boy who reminded me of myself at that age, tripped and fell hard on the asphalt. He didn't cry. He stood up, brushed off his knees, and got back in the game. He was learning resilience. He was learning that falling down is part of life, but getting up is a choice. If I opened this letter, I would be robbing Chloe of that lesson. I would be crippling her all over again. I looked at Sarah. "Do we have a shredder in the office?" I asked. Sarah nodded. "Of course." I handed the letter back to her unopened. "Shred it," I said. Sarah looked surprised. "You do not want to read it?" I shook my head. Number 1. I know that story already. I am writing a new one. I turned away from the past and walked toward the photographers who were waiting to document my future. Standing by the entrance of the center was a man. He was tall with broad shoulders and a kind face. He was wearing a hard hat and holding a set of blueprints. This was Elijah, the architect I had hired to design the expansion. He owned his own firm, a self-made man who had started as a bricklayer. When he saw me approaching, he didn't look at my shoes. He didn't look at my jewelry. He looked me in the eye. "Ready for the close-up, Madam Chairwoman?" he asked, his voice warm and deep. I smiled, and this time it reached my eyes. "I am ready, Elijah," I said. He held out his hand, not to take something from me, but to help me step over a pile of construction debris. I took it. His grip was firm and equal. Together we walked into the light of the camera flashes. But this time, I wasn't hiding in the shadows. I was the main event. I am Viola Davis. I was a truck driver. I was a scapegoat. I was a ghost in my own family. Now I am a CEO. I am a philanthropist. And most importantly, I am free. I stood on the balcony of the center, looking out over the city of Chicago. The sun was setting, painting the skyline in shades of gold and violet. People often ask me if I regret what happened that night. They ask if I regret evicting my own sister. They ask if I feel guilty for letting my family hit rock bottom. I look at them, and I tell them the truth. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you to stay afloat. Family is not about whose blood runs in your veins. It is about who stands by you when you are bleeding. It is about respect. It is about reciprocity. For 12 years, I watered a dead plant, hoping it would bloom. I poured my love and my resources into a black hole, expecting it to fill up. All I got was darkness. It took a moment of absolute humiliation to wake me up. It took losing my family to find myself. I looked down at the courtyard below. The kids were gathering for dinner. They were strangers to me a few months ago. Now they were my purpose. They were a family built on hope, not obligation. I touched the pearl earrings in my ears. My mother's legacy was safe. My heart was safe. If you are watching this and you feel like you are the one always giving, always sacrificing, always being told you are not enough, listen to me. Stop. Stop driving the truck for people who wouldn't walk across the street for you. Stop paying the bills for people who mock your work. Stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your worth is not a negotiation. It is a fact. And if they cannot see it, it is time to turn on the floodlights and show them the door. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. My name is Viola, and this is my house. I turned from the railing and walked back inside where the work was waiting. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from something. I was walking toward something. I was finally home. This is the end of my story, but it might be the beginning of yours. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to cut ties to save your soul. Like and subscribe for more stories of justice and reclaiming your power. Remember, you are the CEO of your own life. Do not let anyone else sit in the chair. I stood on the roof of the V-Line Tower, 40 stories above the streets of Chicago. The wind up here was strong. It whipped my hair around my face and tugged at the hem of my white blazer, but I did not shiver. The cold air felt clean. It felt like purification. Below me, the city was a grid of golden lights. Somewhere down there in the maze of streets was a motel room where my sister was probably sleeping on a lumpy mattress. Somewhere down there was a holding cell where Preston Sterling was sitting on a metal bench contemplating his ruin. And somewhere down there was the ghost of the woman I used to be. For 12 years I walked through life with my head down. I was the silent sister, the checkbook, the fixer. I was the person everyone called when they needed something and the person everyone forgot when the cameras were flashing. I allowed them to erase me. I allowed them to convince me that my value was tied to how much pain I could endure for their sake. They told me that family is everything. They told me that blood is thicker than water. They used those words like chains to bind me to their toxicity. They weaponized my loyalty. They turned my love into a cage and handed me the bill for the lock. But standing here tonight, looking at the empire I built with my own 2 hands, I realized the truth. They were wrong. Family is not about whose DNA runs in your veins. It is not about a shared last name or a history of holidays spent pretending to be happy. Biology is an accident of birth. Family is a choice. Family is respect. Family is reciprocity. Family is the people who stand beside you when you are driving through a snowstorm at 3 in the morning, not the people who wait at the finish line to take the trophy. Preston called me a parasite. He called me a freeloader. For a moment in that ballroom I almost believed him because I had spent so long listening to their narrative. But the math does not lie. I was never the parasite. I was the host. I was the vein they tapped into to keep their dying facade alive. And the moment I cut the supply, the moment I stopped feeding their ego and their bank accounts, they withered. I walked over to the edge of the parapet. I placed my hands on the cold railing. I looked down at the highway stretching out into the darkness like a ribbon of light. I could see the trucks moving. My trucks. Hundreds of them carrying the lifeblood of the economy. I built this. I did not inherit it. I did not steal it. I did not marry into it. I built it mile by mile, shift by shift. And because I built it, I have the right to protect it. Some people will say I was too harsh. They will say I should have forgiven Chloe. They will say she was young and influenced by a bad father-in-law. They will say that throwing your own sister out on her wedding night is an act of cruelty. Let them talk. Forgiveness is a beautiful thing, but it is not a suicide pact. You do not have to forgive the hand that holds the knife while it is still cutting you. You do not have to keep the door open for people who only come inside to steal the furniture. I touched the pearl earrings in my ears. They were warm against my skin. My mother wore these pearls with dignity. She never let the world break her. And tonight, I honored her memory, not by being a martyr, but by being a warrior. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the rarefied air of the summit. I am Viola Davis. I am not a victim. I am not a doormat, and I am certainly not a freeloader. I am the CEO of my own life. And for the first time in 32 years, the board of directors is unanimous. We are moving forward, alone, unafraid, and free. I turned away from the edge. The door to the stairwell was open, spilling warm light onto the roof. My team was waiting downstairs. Elijah the architect was waiting. A new contract was waiting. A new life was waiting. I walked toward the light. I did not look back at the city below. I did not look back at the past. The rearview mirror is for checking what is behind you, but I am not driving in reverse anymore. I am shifting into high gear, and I am never slowing down again. So I have a question for you. If you were in my shoes standing in that ballroom holding the power to destroy the people who used you, what would you have done? Would you have signed the check and saved them one last time, hoping that maybe this time they would change? Would you have let them humiliate you just to keep the peace? Or would you have done what I did? Would you have turned on the lights, burned the bridge, and walked away from the wreckage without looking back? Did I go too far? Or did I finally go far enough? Tha thu he trung fat. Forgive or punish? Tell me your choice in the comments below. Because I made mine, and I sleep just fine at night. This story teaches us that self-worth is non-negotiable, and that setting boundaries is an act of survival, not cruelty. Viola spent years enabling her sister's toxicity, believing that financial support was the same as love. She learned that you cannot save someone who is committed to using you. True power comes not just from financial independence, but from the courage to walk away from anyone, family included, who disrespects your existence. We teach people how to treat us, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to say no and close the door forever. If this story ignited a fire in you to reclaim your own power and stop apologizing for your success, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Share this video with a friend who needs to be reminded that they are the CEO of their own life. Do not let anyone treat you like an option when you are the priority. Join our community of survivors and thrivers and let us build our empires together. Thank you for watching.